Thanks, Hamish. In a recent press conference, Scott Morrison said that he believes in all the women of Australia. This is despite for months broadly dismissing and ignoring the allegations of sexual assault and harassment made by women from within the parliament. Scott Morrison went on to concede in an interview yesterday that blokes don't always get it right all the time, and now finds himself at the centre of a political storm. My question to the panel is whether we are to believe that Scott Morrison is genuinely committed to this issue, or are these the words of a politician scrambling to find his way out of a messy predicament, largely of his own making?
Sam Mostyn.
Well, thank you, Kirsten. It's the question of our time, isn't it? And I notice you're here with a young woman as well, slightly younger than my daughter, and these questions have been plaguing all of us, not just this week, but in the months and years that we've been experiencing just a general lack of equality, and then a whole lot of really nasty things that have been happening in the place that's meant to set the tone for the country, in Parliament House. So it disturbs me to hear a Prime Minister saying that it's taken all of this into these last few days to suddenly work these things out. But what it does tell me is that it's only environments where you have lots of women in power and alongside men that get to observe these things at close range to actually see what's going on. And in my experience over 30 years in many big organisations, a lot of men start by saying that it's taken a long time to work that out because they've been up there by themselves with other groups of men, and any homogenous group can't work out what's happening around it because they don't have the eyes or the antenna to tell you what's been going wrong. So I'm hoping that it's got so bad that the Prime Minister does really care. There are many things he could be doing right now, his government could be doing right now, that would tell us that he cares. He could accept Kate Jenkins' 55 recommendations to make all of our workplaces safer. He could be shuffling his cabinet to make sure there are lots of women that are in very senior positions.
Do you believe him, though, that he gets it?
I think he's got it politically. I think this has been a week where everything has come together, whether it's been...
But that's a different thing. Does he fundamentally get this issue?
I think he gets it now. I think he gets how horrific... I think what was the most disturbing thing for the Prime Minister were those gross acts by young men inside Parliament House that said they completely disrespected women who chose to be MPs. At that point, I think the Prime Minister really did get it because it was such an affront. But for women, I'm sure the women in the audience and watching tonight, we're so used to these kind of behaviours that we've been getting it for a very, very long time. And we're looking for men and women in leadership that actually say to us, enough's enough, as all of the rallies did around the country. Men and women called for this change and enough is enough. But they also said that we've got to start respecting women. There's a fundamental primary reason why these things happen, and it's a lack of respect for us. It's our failure to have been allowed through the corridors of power and to be in equal numbers, running things, leading things, and we've been kept at bay. And that's why I think it came as such a surprise, because I don't think the Prime Minister's had experience really of a community and a parliament that has women in equal numbers.
Adam Creighton, how did you see those rallies?
Well, look, the March for Justice, I thought... I was actually in Melbourne last week for it, actually, and I walked past it, and I must say there were so many placards which were really anti-Scott Morrison rather than, pro-woman. I thought it was a very political march. And the other thought that came to mind is, what is the tangible aim of those people who are marching? I mean, if you go back 120 years, obviously women wanted the vote, and certainly, they should have got it. Many decades later, there was abortion. But what is justice this time? It's like, it's like marching for happiness. I mean, it's, of course everyone wants it, but what is the tangible outcome?
It was pretty clear, wasn't it? I mean,
yes, but what can the federal government do about attitudes? It's the Commonwealth government. It can't legislate for people to be nice, right? It just can't. And no matter what the Prime Minister says, no matter what platitudes he utters, it's not going to change people's attitudes. That's up to civil society.
That's what great leadership is all about. Tone from the top. The Prime Minister of the country going out...
Most people don't pay any attention,
do you know what would have made all the difference?
To what the Prime Minister says.
No, they do.
No,
they absolutely.
Only the political class does. People here do, but most
people have been paying attention to the Prime Minister's behaviour, which has been keeping women down for the last couple of years. I think those people have got very comfortable with the kind of things that have been happening to women, and suddenly we all had enough. That's why the marches took place. But the thing the Prime Minister could have done...
When you say we, though, I mean, it's only 100,000 or so women who marched. It's not all women who marched.
I think
it's bad to tarnish all men with... with the same brush.
But we don't tarnish all men with the same brush. That's not what's going on here.
That's the implication. Men are half the population. Women are half the population. There are good and bad people in both groups.
So we're more than half the population, and we have been held at bay. We are murdering a woman once a week in this country, and have been doing that for many, many years. What would it take to get a community and the top of our parliament to say, we get that we've got to change the behaviour, both of our parliaments, of our leaders, to actually listen to women? All women wanted in that rally, and the men, was to be listened to. And then know what? I'm actually certain that if the Prime Minister and his cabinet had gone out onto the forecourt of Parliament House, I don't think they would have been booed. No one else from the Parliament that went out was booed. I think they would have actually been asked to listen to all those speakers and then to listen to Brittany Higgins explain what it's like to be a survivor of an alleged rape metres away from the Prime Minister's office. I mean,
just to be
listening
clear,
that-
I'm obviously not condoning any of the things that went on. They are shocking, they're awful, and they should be prosecuted and sacked, and kind of depending on the allegation. But we just have to keep things in
But
proportion.
did you get the sense,
That's all
though,
I'm
that
suggesting.
this was the moment when almost every woman in the country felt every part of those things that had been going on had happened to them in some part of their life, and suddenly
Almost everyone in the country? How do you know that? I mean, that's just
Stan Grant,
Should we do it?
Stan Grant, how did you observe what's going on in Canberra right now?
There are a couple of things, and I think Adam has a point to this extent, that protests do not always indicate mood and do not always presage political change. Remember the Vietnam moratoriums, the biggest protests Australia's probably ever seen, 250,000 people out constantly. The Holt government at the time was returned with an increased majority. We saw 200,000 people walk across the bridge for reconciliation. John Howard would not say sorry. John Howard was returned to office time and time again. I don't know that political movements necessarily translate to that political change or that mood. Another point I would make, though, and I think this is something that has been very apparent to me, is that as necessary and as urgent and as righteous as these claims are, and this movement is, there have been so many women's voices who have not been listened to for a long time. And I just want to say, when it becomes a white middle-class issue, when it is in private schools, when it is in Parliament House, when it is in the press gallery, we take notice. But when Aboriginal women who have been suffering domestic violence at rates 40 times higher than the rest of the population, 10 times more likely to die as a result of that violence, when I have seen Aboriginal women marching and protesting and calling for support for generations, I did not see the same women outside Parliament House. When poor women, when migrant women, when refugee women have suffered these things, I did not see the same media attention. Poor women don't get interviewed on television programs. They're not on Q&A. There are a lot of voices that are not listened to here, and I think while this is a movement and a moment, we need to also reflect on our own blindness and our biases, that we can walk past the suffering of others for such a long time until it lands in your own backyard.
I think you're absolutely right to make that point. It was a point made last week on the consent panel you had here by Joe Williams, who pointed out where does consent and where did the breach of consent start, and it was at the very beginning of the colonies, and he made a very powerful point, as you have too, Stan. It's not to say, though, that if those mistakes have been made and that those women have not been listened to in the past, that this isn't the moment when we all unite and where we have to listen. And I think many of those women, migrant women, women who are on temporary visas, women who have been decimated by the lack of respect for their allegations, whether it's sexual harassment or sexual assault or worse, they came together. And whenever I go to large groups of women now, with a lot of the women you've described, a lot of Indigenous women, a lot of recently arrived migrants, and we talk about the anger that is sitting in the pit of our stomachs, the anger, the fury and the sadness. I think we're drawing on a number of those women's experiences.
What a shame it is, Sam, that a nation reveals what it is by what it cares about. And what a shame it is that it has to happen in white middle-class society for people to suddenly say there is a massive problem here. And it's been happening, as you well know, in factory floors, in homes, for Aboriginal women. And, you know, as Joe pointed out last week, when a nation is built on theft, invasion, massacre and rape, you then wonder now why you have a culture and a society that reflects some of these attitudes. So, of course it's important, Sam, and of course this is a moment. But there have been so many voices not heard and not listened to, and still, sadly, not on this panel tonight, Hamish.